Put a finger down if you've got a friend who expects so much energy, yet doesn't do the same thing for you. This is Rianne's unpopular opinions on healing, where I find real life stories and expose the emotional patterns that most people avoid. Guys, this is a deep story that we need to get into. Let's go. One of my very few friends is starting to become a taker. OP tells us that he's got this friend that when they first met, everything was great. They hit it off and had a great time. However, more recently, not so great. He says that on a recent night out, he was buying his friends drinks, no problem at all. He was totally happy to do that. Didn't expect to be paid back or anything. However, when they went out again, not that long after, he had asked his friend to get him a drink or two, and his friend was really shocked, taken back that he would be asked to do such a thing. OP also tells us that whenever he suggests things to do or places to go, his friend doesn't want to do it. He just wants to do the things that he wants to do. And OP's kind of in a space where he's like, yeah, I'm going to have to talk to my friend. But he's also quite aware that this may end their friendship. And OP is just feeling like, I don't know what to do. And, how can I even trust people in my own life? So he's asking us, what do you think I should do? And this is quite a common space to be in, where there is one person who takes more than they give in a friendship. It's also quite a sensitive space to be in, because on one side, your friends are the family that you cultivate, right? The people that we choose to be around, the people we choose to be connected to. However, it's also very sensitive because it's really easy to be distracted by the drama of what's going on in them situations and not focus on those underlying emotional patterns that keep us in spaces that are not good for us. Now, in previous video, oh goodness, that's terrible English. In my previous video, I was talking more in depth about givers and how that can cause loneliness within a friendship. So today we're going to take a closer look at takers and what kind of emotional patterns that brings up in a friendship. A taker is someone who consistently prioritizes their wants, needs, their energy, their interests over other people's. And this creates a one-sided dynamic where they receive far more support than the other person. I mean, we can directly see that in OP's story, right? That his friend is guiding and leading everything and deciding everything that's happening in that friendship. Often when we see this, it's because we are looking at a lack of boundaries. Now, first things first, a lack of boundaries is not the reason why a friend of yours may be a taker. However, we do often see takers attracting givers and givers attracting takers. So this may be the reason why you're kind of stuck in that dynamic. Now, some people are takers because of a number of things, namely because it could be a survival mentality. They could have grown up in an environment that was either competitive or scarce, and they had to really fight for the things that they needed. So they had to really grab for attention, really beg for that, support and love, food, resources, facilities. They had to fight through it. So that could be a reason why they are like that now. There's also the insecurity. They feel the need to hoard resources and affection to feel secure. And then there's also lack of empathy. Because the focus is on themselves, they aren't actually really appreciating how their behavior affects other people because they are focused on their own goals. Look at OP's friend. OP spent the whole evening buying his friend drinks, right? So his friend's just like, great, that could be filling up that void of insecurity, for example, that his friend is buying him things. However, when he's now been asked to reciprocate that kind of, support, that care, that love, he can't do that. He's like, what? How are you, what? Huh? Because the goal was on himself and now he has to give it out to other people. It doesn't make sense to him. However, we're not going to give hate because we see that the drama is a reflection of those underlying emotional patterns. Because honestly, them things that I just spoke about now are literally just 3. There are still so many other reasons why a person might be a taker. And we realize that the way that people behave is a reflection of the experiences they've had in their lives. So this isn't about cultivating hate for someone who might be a taker. It's just about awareness, food for thought. I mean, maybe you're a taker. Maybe you're a giver. Now, people are often givers when they have deep empathy, desire to form strong bonds with other people. And that can be for a multitude of reasons. Your childhood and past experiences. Perhaps, you were put in a caretaker role as a child. So now you identify self-worth with helping others, like what you can do for other people. So you're more likely to give a lot of yourself to prove that worth to you. There's also psychological needs, the underlying need to feel loved, to feel admired, to feel needed. Now, some of us, maybe even more than some of us, maybe a lot of us struggle with boundaries, which leads to that overgiving because there's that fear of abandonment or the inability to get help for ourselves. If we look at OP directly, like even the title tells us a lot about that fear of abandonment. You know, he says about he's got them very few friends. It's very likely that his friend has always been a taker. It's just he has put a lot of value onto that friendship. And then that fear, now we can see it in that story. If he speaks up about that disbalance, he's got that fear that he's going to lose friends. How can he trust anyone? And he's going to have even less friends than he already has. And when we lose friends, particularly when we've only got a small group of them, we can sometimes feel that that's a reflection on us as a person, when we can clearly see it's not. It's his friend's behaviour. And OP, like all of us, deserves to be in balanced, healthy friendships where we support each other. However, a lot of us overlook lots of things that we might say just little, but we brush them aside because, you know, of the value we put on them people or those situations. But then that just creates that unhealthy space. Where we see dysfunction, we see roles. Just like in those dysfunctional family roles, we see that in friendships too. I mean, we're talking about, you know, you're the organizer, you're the gossip queen, you're the shoulder to cry on. I mean, what can start out as an act of kindness for a friend can easily snowball into a, you know, consistent expectation if there aren't boundaries. I mean, how many of us have paid for a friend, you know, for their food, for their drink, for their whatever, when they've been a bit down on their money? Normal behavior. How many of us have, you know, been a shoulder to cry on, been a mini therapist when your friend's mental health takes a dip? Normal behavior. But when you're expected to do that all the time, when you never have that same treatment, you know, when you're not the one who can cry on their shoulder, you're not the one who can be, you know, paid for time to time, that's when we start seeing dysfunction, right? When we're looking at, you know, that dysfunctional friendship, when we're looking at a friendship with a taker, we're seeing behaviors such as only reaching out when they need you. You know, maybe you get telephone calls in the middle of the night needing advice. You know, always forgetting the money, like OP's friend, never got the money to pay for things. Always expecting to be paid for. Doesn't want to go to the places that you want to go. They want to decide all of the plans, like OP's friend. Disappears during your crisis when you need help. Redirects the conversation back to themselves. So no matter what you're talking about, it always goes back to them, because remember, there's that self-focus. Just a few examples, just a bit of food for thought. Takers can be quite charming and well-meaning. However, as a giver, you're going to end up feeling quite drained and used and undervalued in this kind of relationship, because you're often experiencing a cycle of giving, feeling resentment, and then overgiving in hopes of recognition. Because remember, this is very, like, you know, 2D'd in the way that we pick things out, but it's a living action, right? I mean, look at OP. He, you know, he's only got a few friends. He's really hyper vigilant that he hasn't got a lot of friends. So he really values this. However, you know, he's overgiving, he's buying his friends all the drinks, but then when it's his turn, he's not getting it, and he's getting resentment for that because, you know, and he's got the hope that he can somehow fix it, maybe avoid that confrontation of a discussion, but then deep down, he already knows that he needs to speak because it's an unbalanced friendship. This is where boundaries come in. In their simplest form, they are clear, respectful limits that define how you and your friends behave, protecting your mental health, your time, and your personal space. So we're looking at, you know, setting time for calls, protecting your finances, establishing physical space, and limiting emotional dumping. So I was on this Facebook post about money lending, and this woman said she does not lend anyone more than $20. Like, nobody. No one come to her for any money more than $20. And that just stops her from being in any sticky spaces about, you know, being able to support other people, even though she makes more than them. And it stops that kind of, you know, chase up of people not paying you back. For me, I do not answer my telephone to anybody after 6 o'clock. I don't call my phone after 6 because I ain't going to answer it. You can text me, WhatsApp me, whatever. And then I'm going to decide whether I'm going to respond now or it can wait till tomorrow. Because what I might find is urgent, you're going to find different. Do you know what I mean? So I'm not going to set my limits to what other people's expectations are. And that's how we create boundaries. So what are some actionable boundaries that you can implement in reflection to a friend's behavior? Now, we're going to do a little exercise. So you can do it right now, or you can just listen up and do it after, because I have put all the details down in the description box. However, we're going to have 4 little headings. One of them is going to be just what we were talking about, but I'll reiterate it for memory purpose. Time for calls, finances, personal space, emotional dumping, I want you to write down a boundary or an action that you want for each one of those spaces. You don't even have to think about it too deeply, because just put anything and then choose one of them. And that is the one that I want you to work with. That's the one that is the most overriding of a need that you have got. And then in the next 7 days, I would like you to action this boundary. Now, the action can be implementing it, having that discussion, putting it out in the world, or it can be that thought process and that building of that boundary. Because when it comes to making them, it's not simply write out, there we go, it's done. We need preparation for it. Yeah. And if we struggle with it already, if it's something that we find challenging, even if you're in a relationship, in a friendship where you find that your friend is a taker, having those boundaries can be a struggle as it is. So we're going to need a little preparation. So do make sure that you look down in that description box, because I've made a somewhat like a little guide of things to consider that might help you. This takes us to the loop. Now, there's always a loop in these kind of environments, isn't there? There's always an emotional pattern that keeps us in the space that we don't want to be in. So we're looking at the loop of the taker, in that friendship, that disbalance. And it starts with the internalization phase. High intensity friendship, it starts off maybe even with a bang, get on really well. We also see a lot of validation, which makes the giver feel needed. Yeah, great start. Then we see the normalization phase, where we see a shift in those roles, blurred boundaries, and the dump. The giver becomes the emotional landfill for the taker. Then we go on to the drain and the resentment. Now, we're seeing emotional depletion. We're seeing the disappearing act. When the giver, when you need support, your friend ain't anywhere to be seen because they're busy, they're unavailable. You end up feeling resentful, just like OP. Look how he's feeling right now. That leads to the conflict and boundaries phase. There's guilt trips when the giver tries to make boundaries or tries to say no. Giver ends up walking on eggshells. And there's some gaslighting going on there as well, because the giver's being invalidated because, you're overreacting to the response to your needs, which aren't being met. That takes us to the crash or the re-engagement. Okay, so it's like a little fork in the road here. So it's basically a breaking point. The giver can't really deal with this behavior anymore. It's too imbalanced. So they will either change their behavior. The taker, the giver stands up, goes, hey, this is my boundary. I'm going to stop paying for your drinks now. And they go, oh, sorry. And then temporarily, they're going to fix that. And then it's temporary, remember? So the cycle is going to start again. Or if the boundaries hold, I'm not buying your drinks anymore. I can see why some people would behave like this. However, regardless of the role that you are in a friendship, giver or taker, you are the only person who is responsible for the way in which you sit in the space and the behaviors that you accept. Now, that negative space, the one that I spoke about in a lot more detail in my previous video, so if you haven't seen that, do go and check it out. But that negative space is going to be created when we turn a blind eye, for real, when we hold on longer than we need to. Because actually, regardless of how we dust things off, we give another chance, we avoid things, we can feel that disbalance, right? We can see that dysfunction. We know it's not right if you give all your energy to your friend when they need you, however that might be, and then when you need the same, they're nowhere to be seen. They're busy, they're unavailable, the convo go back to them. Really, you need to question, why am I sitting in this space? Why are you holding on to those relationships? What does it say about you if those friendships don't work out? That's the real question, isn't it? That fear of abandonment, that fear of reflection. But when it comes down to it, what is it reflecting about you? Another person's behavior. Yes, it's a big pot to be steering in and to pull out. But we're now going to go directly into a moment of reflection with a few questions that you can sit and ask yourself to gain better knowledge and understanding and strength in this space. I've already added the little guide for the boundary creation down in the description, so please do check it. So have a look at these few questions and see where it takes you. 1. What situations or people consistently leave me feeling drained, resentful, or exhausted? 2. Do I believe that I need to be nice to earn respect? 3. How would I spend the time and energy that I currently use accommodating others? 4. That I have been avoiding, and how can I phrase it? Now, healing isn't about being perfect. It's about awareness of what drives it. So if what we were speaking about today resonated, sit with it gently. And until the next time I see you, I hear you, I see you, and I feel you. Bottoms up.